Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Brian from One Stop Board Shop. As a service center and a retailer, we're constantly asked, what's the best tire for me for one-wheelers? So today, we're gonna answer that question. With so many tires on the market, it's kind of important to know what the differences between tires are. Shape, compound, slick versus treaded, etc. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk a little bit about the differences between some of these. Now, we're not gonna get into every granular detail because there's just too much, but these concepts should help you make an informed decision as you go through your tire purchasing process. So we're gonna start with what type of rider are you? If you like to ride street versus trail, that's the first round of the conversation that we want to have, because that's going to tell you whether or not you're going to want to go with a slick or treaded. Or if you're kind of in the middle, it's going to tell whether or not you want to go with a low compound slick or a high compound treaded. Let me explain what that means. Compound is the softness or durometer of the tire. So what that means is when you touch and feel a tire, you can feel how soft the rubber is or how hard it is. So the lower the number, the lower the compound. The higher the number, the higher the compound. This trade-off will give you a pro and a con in terms of mileage and range versus wearability and feel. So the lower the compound, the more grip it's gonna have, the better it's gonna feel. Conversely, it won't last as long because the soft compound is going to, the soft rubber is going to get worn away quicker. Alternatively, if you want to go with a higher compound, the higher compound will last a lot longer, but because it's a thicker, denser rubber, it won't feel as good as a softer compound in most applications. So if you're a trail rider, you're realistically going to want to go with the treaded tire because those treads are going to help you grip into dirt, rocks, gravel, off-road type environments. If you're a street rider, you're realistically going to want to go with a slick tire because a slick tire, it has more surface contact for asphalt. If you're kind of in the middle, if you're, 60-40 or 70-30 between street and trail, you either want to go with a soft compound slick tire because the slick aspect will be good for street, but the soft compound will be grippier on dirt, or you may want to go with a higher compound treaded tire. For the converse reasons. If you don't know what you like and you want a more all-round tire, the Enduro is a really good option for you. It's not quite a treaded tire, and it's not quite a slick. It has treads, but it has a very slick profile to it. You can see the difference between a treaded tire here with all the nubs and the grooves versus the Enduro tire made by the Float Life, which has a very slick surface to it, but it still has treads. That's gonna be a much more all-round tire. It's a much more stable tire, and that's a great transition to talk about shape. There's a very big difference between the spectrum of stable to carvy and agile. So when you're riding, let's say an XR, that's got a Vega, the stock tire. That Vega is a very flat surface. So it's kind of like riding a little bit on a rolling pin or a brick, and it's very shouldery. So when you're riding, you're gonna be on the shoulders, like your knuckles, as you take your carves. That means that your straightaways, your lines, they're all gonna be very, very stable, but your carving is gonna be a little bit harder and wear more on the shoulders. So those are gonna wear away faster, meaning if you're a big carver, Vega is not going to last as long. It's also an extremely high durometer, which means that it lasts, a good amount of time, but it doesn't quite feel as good. That's why we carry aftermarket performance tires to alleviate those issues with stock tires. If you have, let's say, a Pint or a GT, that's going to be about the same durometer as a Vega, which is the stock tire on an XR, but it's going to be a much rounder profile. So if you don't like it as round and you want something a little bit more stable, again, you may want to go with an aftermarket tire. Now, one of the most important aspects of choosing a tire that will affect everything about how you ride is the shape, the profile. So as I said before, there's that spectrum, stable to carvy. Depending on which tire you pick is going to be how the tire feels from a profile perspective. So we carry Hoosier, Burris, and TFL tires here at One Stop Board Shop. We will service and install just about any brand of tire that fits on a one wheel, as long as there isn't any kind of notoriety for rubbing or issues that are one wheel specific, right? So Hoosier on the treaded side, If you're getting a 6-inch treaded versus a 5.5-inch treaded, the 6-inch treaded is actually a very stable tire with a little bit of carve, whereas the 5.5-inch treaded is an extremely carvy and agile tire. The 5.5-inch treaded is known as the most pint-like feeling for an XR on the market that's not converting your board to a growler. So a full-size XR, if you want it to feel as pinty and GT-ish as you can, put a 5.5 treaded on there. It's just gonna be the most agile tire out there. On the same front, Burris, the treaded tire, on the 6-inch side, which compares to the Hoosier 6-inch in terms of size, is a much carvier tire than the Hoosier 6-inch tire treaded, which is a little bit more of a stable tire. Comparing the slicks between Hoosier and Burris, Burris is going to be a carvier tire than Hoosier overall on the XR side. The Enduro, as I've said before, is a more all-rounded tire for the XR. It's a very stable tire, and it's got I'll call it collapsible sidewalls. They kind of dig in when you carve a little bit. TFL designed that specifically so that it could converse as an all-round tire. You have the stability of a straightaway with the carvability of turning. So that's something that you should keep in mind as well. I personally, as a rider, I always prefer carvy. I'm a Burris guy on my XRs. That's just my preference as a rider. But I have an Enduro on my GT, which feels totally different than the Enduro on the XR. The Enduro on the GT is a very carvy tire. It's a very round tire. So it feels exactly like my riding profile calls for. I also want to make sure that you guys understand when you're comparing compounds, Burris and Hoosier, they aren't the same company, so they don't use the same compound codes, but they are similar in terms of a Burris SS11, 22, or 33A, and those line right up with Hoosier's D10, 20, and 30A. So those two compounds, if you're looking at an SS11, it's about the same compound as a Hoosier D10A. So keep in mind when you're looking between the two tire brands that those compounds are kind of equal to each other so that you understand where you are in the compound grid, right? One of the other things that I wanted to mention to you guys about compound is preference is not everything. It also matters where you live. If you live in a paved suburban area where, you know, with wonderful streets that have no issues, you can kind of pick what you want, what works best for you. But if you're like us over here in the Northeast with potholes and salted roads, New York and New Jersey roads are definitely worse for wear. We have to keep in mind the wearability aspect and what can puncture our tires. A higher compound tire is much less likely to get a puncture or a leak than a low compound tire. Not to say it can't happen on both, but it is something to consider. Our New York riders who live in NYC, we always recommend, if they don't have an explicit preference, to take a higher compound tire because those streets are so beat up and there's always debris and stuff in the streets that they may want to take a look at a higher compound tire specifically so that they get a little bit more longevity out of their tire. If they're okay with swapping their tire on a regular basis, then it's fine. Also, with regards to the longevity of a tire, absolutely, definitely, 100%, we recommend putting in tire sealant, but good tire sealant. So there are several brands out there that make good tire sealant. I don't recommend Slime. Slime, what I tell our people here, our customers here, is Slime will get you to your next tire change, but it won't prevent the next tire change. We use Armadillos here in our service center. Whenever we're adding sealant to a tire, that's pretty much what we use. We've been using it since Armadillos came out. That is probably the best recommendation I can make for any tire selection that you pick for your Onewheel. Couple other things of note. One is if you do get a slick tire, any slick tire should have a tread wear indicator. This little nub right here that you'll see them across the entire tire. What that is because it's a slick and it doesn't have treads, you need to know how much life you have left of your tire. So those little holes you see are not holes, they're tread wear indicators. That allows you to tell how much life you have left of your tire. Because on a treaded tire, you can just tell because you have tread and then you have in between your tread. That's your indicator right there, but you don't have the same thing on a slick. One other thing I'd like to talk about is range loss versus, range gain and noise. So there's a couple things, and there's some exceptions to these rules, but range loss is pretty much always going to happen in a treaded tire, and range gain is always going to happen in a slick tire. And I use the word always very loosely because there are absolutely exceptions to this rule, and there are an incredible amount of factors that determine range. So if you're riding a treaded tire at 25 PSI in the middle of the summer versus a slick tire at 16 PSI on a trail in the dead of winter, even though factor for factor, your treaded tire should get less range, your slick tire in those conditions would get less range. So you need to be, clear on the fact that it has to be apples to apples comparing, range loss. Same PSI, same time of year, same weather, same streets, etc. So as a general rule of thumb, you can expect to have, it'll be negligible, but you should expect to have a mile or two of range loss on an XR, a little bit less on a Pint because there's just less battery. Pint X and GT, you'll have, again, a little bit more because of the amount of range you get. It's proportionate, obviously. But treaded, you're gonna have a little less range. Slick, you're gonna have a little bit more. And the only time that spread really changes, the range spread, is when you're changing size. So if you go with a bigger slick or a smaller treaded, that will also change the factor. We've seen a Hoosier 5.5 treaded get better range than like a Vega slick in some instances. So keep those things in mind when you're figuring out what tire is best for you, because if range is incredibly important to you, you might want to consider that as a factor. Noise is another thing that you should also consider. Treaded tires, by nature of the fact that they are meant to have grip and pick up everything, they're going to be noisier, especially when you have a fender. That's just the nature of a treaded tire. You just have to know that going into getting a treaded tire. Slick tires and enduros are a little bit quieter, so keep that in mind as well. If volume is important to you, you might want to go with a slick or an enduro over a treaded. Whereas if it doesn't matter, but you really want that grippier feel, a treaded is probably the way to go. All right, guys, so that was a lot of information, but tire choices are a complex and confusing topic, and we wanted to make sure that you had all of the resources at your disposal to make an informed decision. So if you have any other questions, drop them in the comments below, and we also want to hear what tire you're riding now, what tire you're thinking about riding, what you'd like to see from a tire. Drop all of that information in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you hit that thumbs up button, and don't forget to subscribe for more awesome videos like this. Stay riding, guys.